Well, thank you again for joining us as we walk through the book of Philippians. As we continue this journey today, we're going to look at verses 17, 18, and 19 of chapter 3. Last time we talked about pressing on and that we need to forget what lies behind and we need to press on to the goal, to God's call upon our life. Learn from our past, but we need to move on. We need to press on because none of us have arrived. We're not where we should be in this relationship with Jesus, but it's a lifelong journey, that of just growing in this relationship with Jesus. Remember that in Paul's life, Jesus was it. Jesus was his life. That he says, for me to live is Christ and to die is gain. And that's the picture of a New Testament follower of Jesus, that Jesus is to be our life. And we see that here. And man, we see Paul's heart in these couple of verses. I'm going to read you chapter 3, begin with verse 17. Listen to what this says. It says, brethren, join in following my example. Man, listen to that now. Listen to what he's saying. He says, join in following my example and observe those who walk according to the pattern you have seen in us. For many walk, of whom I often told you, and now tell you even weeping. They're enemies of the cross of Christ, whose end is destruction, whose God is their appetite, and whose glory is their shame, who set their minds on earthly things. A couple of thoughts about that just want to share with you real quick. The first thing is walk this way. Paul says, follow my example. That's pretty powerful words, isn't it? Paul says, you want to see how to walk like Jesus walked? Paul says, look at me. Follow my example, brethren. The word brethren comes from a word that means of the same spiritual womb. He says, join me in following Jesus. Watch what I do and you do the same thing. Imitate me. Join with me. Do what I do. The word here that he uses, for example, is a word that means a pattern or a model, or a pattern to imitate. Paul says, look, walk this way. Walk like I walk. Follow my footprints. He says, and observe those who do the same thing. Observe those who walk this way. Give attention to them. Look at their life. Watch other people who are following Jesus, and you imitate what they do. Man, he says, give attention to their lifestyle. Give attention to their choices. Give attention to the way they handle circumstances. Paul says, watch me and watch those that walk like us. He says, it's a pattern here. It's a model for you to follow. As I think about that, the importance of watching other people. So thankful for people God put in my life that I could watch, that model Jesus for me, that model walking with Jesus, that let Jesus be Jesus in and through their lives and model that for me. But I also think about the importance of me be an example for someone else to follow, because someone's watching me. Someone's watching you. You may know who they are. You may not know who they are. Is my life worth following? Am I leading people to Jesus? When people follow in my footsteps, are they following Jesus? Think about that. Because someone's watching you, and we need to be a model. We need to be an example that lead people to Jesus. When they follow us, they need to be following the one that we are following, who is Jesus, who is our life. Can't stress to you the importance of simply letting Jesus be Jesus in me, and you letting Jesus be Jesus in you. And then he says this. He says, many walk in this way. He says, look, I've told you this before. And he says, I tell you this today, weeping. You see, Paul is broken over the way these people are living, the way that these people are walking. He uses 5 phrases to describe them. And listen to what he says. He says they're enemies of the cross. Paul says, look, there are people that are enemies of the cross. They're in opposition to the cross. They speak and they live in rebellion against the finished work of Jesus on the cross. To them, the cross is absolute foolishness. They see no value in the cross. They see no value in what Jesus did on the cross for them. They see no value in a relationship with Jesus. And what they're doing is they're missing the whole purpose for this life. And Paul says, look, I'm sharing this with you. I'm telling you, there's many people in opposition to the cross. And Paul says, it breaks my heart. I tell you this, weeping. The second phrase that he uses is that whose end is destruction. Paul says whose end is destruction. Guys, look, that's not temporary destruction. That's not temporary judgment. Paul is talking about eternal judgment, being eternally separated from God in a godless place called hell. The eternal judgment is for those who reject Jesus, those who the cross has absolutely no value, who are enemies of the cross. And Paul says, listen to me, church. I am weeping as I write this to you. You see, Paul cared about people. Paul cared about these people who were enemies of the cross because he understood that the end was destruction. It was separation from God in hell. And Paul did not want that for these people. And as he's writing this letter, he says, I'm telling you that there's many, many people whose life will end in destruction. And it broke Paul's heart. The next phrase that he used to describe them is, whose God is their appetite. The picture here is that they pursue their own selfish and sinful desires. They live life seeking their own pleasure. Life is all about them. It's all about what they want to do, regardless of the effect it has on their life and regardless of who else it hurts. Paul says they're very self-centered people. They're living a life full of sin. They're pursuing their own selfish pleasures. Life is all about them. He said there's many people as I write this. And it breaks my heart that they're living a very self-centered, sinful life. I went to a memorial service the other day for a guy that loved Jesus. He had this sign in his yard that I've seen over and over again as I drove past his house. It simply said it's all about Jesus. You see, these folks don't understand that. They're living in rebellion against Jesus, and life's all about them and nothing about Jesus. He says, whose glory is their shame. You see, their glory, or they boast in what they call freedom, supposed lifestyle, which really is not freedom, but is leading them into bondage. That they're in bondage to their own flesh. They're in bondage to their own sinful desires and their own sinful lust, and they brag about how they live. You see, their glory is in their shame, but they don't see it. He goes on, the last phrase that he uses here is, who set their minds on earthly things. You see, their mind is on temporal things, not on eternal things. They're seeking the temporary. They're seeking temporary happiness, and they're trying to fulfill their own desires temporarily instead of seeking the one who can give them eternal joy and eternal peace, and that's Jesus. And Paul says, it breaks my heart. He says, I'm weeping as I write this to you. A couple of thoughts about that. That, man, God really spoke to me as I studied this. And one is this, my lack of brokenness over the lostness of our culture. You see, there's many people in our culture that this passage describes. There's many people in our culture who walk as enemies. They're enemies of the cross of Christ. Their end is destruction. Their God is their appetite, whose glory is their shame, and they're seeking the things of the world. And I should be broken over people that don't know Jesus, the lostness of our culture. What about you? Would you join me in asking God to break our hearts over the lostness of our culture? And then the second thing is this, is the importance of the way that I live. The importance of being an example, a model for people to follow in the culture in which I live. You see, I need to let Jesus be Jesus in me so other people can see Jesus being Jesus in me. And I challenge you. I challenge you to let Jesus be Jesus in you in the middle of a culture that don't know Jesus. I pray you have a blessed day. I pray God has really used this to speak to your heart like he has mine. And let's go and man, let's live out Jesus in the culture in which we live. People desperately need to see the radical change that Jesus makes in a life, just like he made in the life of Paul. Let Jesus be Jesus in you today.